Well, folks, in this topsy-turvy, unpredictable college football season, this one we pretty much knew was going to land as it has. We've got Oregon, they're 5-0. Ohio State's 5-0. They look to be the two best teams in the Big Ten, if not beyond that. We got Ryan Winter on the line from Sports Chat 503 to help us break it down. Ryan, it is always great to see you. How you doing tonight?
Fantastic, Mark. Thank you so much for what you do for us and the entire college football world.
Absolutely. And nobody needs to do anything for this one. You just let the guys play. Just let's rev it up on Saturday. And it is kind of difficult to overhype this one. So we'll go from the atmosphere and the vibe and the hype, and we'll go down to the nuts and bolts of the X's and O's here in a minute. But you've been in Autzen Stadium a zillion times. This may be, I'm guessing, about as fever of a pitch as you've experienced.
Yeah, it's the number one game. I feel like it's the two best teams historically. Ohio State has run their conference over the last decade or more. Oregon has been running their conference for the last decade or more now. It feels like I don't put Oregon on the same level as I do the Buckeyes. I'm a Mets fan. I look up to the Yankees. It's kind of one of those things where, maybe one of these years will be competitive kind of a thing. But Oregon did a lot by coming out to the Horseshoe and winning that game. And I feel like what that happened in that game, what solidified right there, these are obviously very different teams, different coaching staffs, all this sort of stuff for the Oregon side. But what that did was it gave there's a little bit more national credibility, and it sets this game up for a real big one. We don't have to do anything for it, but we will all do our part to overhype the living heck out of this thing all week long. We already have been doing it all year long. Now it's finally here. We're gonna bring it.
And, there's a situation with college football fans, and I see it all the time where there's a different approach to various programs. Some of them they respect, they admire. Of course, for that Saturday, they're the enemy, but it's not a big deal in regards to any kind of venom directed toward them. But with other programs, maybe it is. So where do Oregon fans typically stand in terms of their approach, their look at Ohio State football?
It's a good question. Historically, I think we're very regionalist, right? One of the things I always think it's important, Colin Cowherd said years ago, he was out here in Portland. He was telling me college football is becoming more national, and it's becoming less regional and becoming more national. And to where we on the West Coast are going to care what the SEC is doing or what the Big Ten is doing. Historically, you would hear about what's happening in other parts of the country. Maybe you'd follow along here and there, unless you're a guy like you who's interested in all of it. Most people were pretty regional, and we've really expanded it out. Now that our conference has been taken from us, and now we're all different piece and parceled out to all these different conferences, now it really matters. Ohio State's a team that we've looked up to. I mean, I remember when Rob Mullins took over as the athletic director, first 5 years, he talked a lot about how he wanted to change the perception of Oregon sports to be focused on competing nationally, not just competing with our local brethren, Oregon State, Washington, but to try to have a bigger perspective out there. Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Georgia, at that time, Clemson or whatever else. We have Texas, Oklahoma. These are all the big name brands, the classic blue bloods, right? And I don't think Oregon's ever been really looked as a blue blood. I think Oregon has worked very hard to put itself in the position it's in right now. But it's the young money group. It's the new money group. It's the flash and substance and the uniforms and everything else. No national championship. They always say that stands for zero, not an O. Those are the kind of things I think that we're still working our way up. Ohio State's been there. My aunt, rest in peace to my aunt, when we left the national championship game in Dallas after losing to Ohio State, that was the biggest, I don't want to be too graphic, but kick in the shorts that we could have got. That was the time we thought we were going to win it. We had the Heisman Trophy winner. Everything was on board. We had just beat Jameis Winston and that FSU team that won the year before or everything else. We thought that was it. And the fact that Ohio State came in there with a third-string quarterback, they had obviously great talent, but they came in and cleaned the clock in the second half. And my aunt said, that's just another championship for them. And that always rings in my ear. That's just another championship for their trophy case. We don't have one in the goddamn trophy case. What that would have meant for us versus what that meant for them, they were like, okay, whatever, next year. And that's the kind of thing. that we're not there yet. We're not at the Ohio State level. We're not at the Yankees level of counting championships. We're trying to get there. This game is absolutely paramount for Oregon. If Oregon can come out and win this game in year one of the Big Ten, in year one of being able to be in this conference and possibly giving an opportunity to win the conference, I mean, it's out of, I can't believe, I can't even find words to describe it. The fact that Oregon is in this position right now. They just got to cash the chips in, man. They got to get it done. I don't know if they will, but they're in a great position to right now.
And Ryan, you brought up that 2021 game and the importance of that game, even though it did not culminate with a championship for Oregon. Of course, they made it to the Pac-12 championship game. It did not culminate with a championship for Ohio State. They still had a top 5 team that went to the Rose Bowl and won it, but they lost to Michigan, didn't win the Big Ten title. But at the same time, considering what the recent history was against, the all-time history, Ohio State was
9-0.
Whatever the number was, 9-0.
Yeah.
And won that Rose Bowl, of course, in 2010, won that national championship game in 2014, and then had they, as a 2-touchdown favorite, just smacked around Oregon again, there might have been a different, just this continued, they're at much different places on the pantheon of college football. But Oregon got that done. And to your point, does that affect what we're going to see on Saturday? Not at all.
No.
Different teams, different coaching staffs, the whole thing. But in regards to the way people perceive these programs and these teams, I think it did a lot for the Oregon brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now,
I was about to say that's also really quickly. That's a huge. That's probably our biggest non-conference win in program history. Mark, that's just another game for Ohio State. As it was lost, it was a tough one, but we look at that as the biggest one ever. That kind of shows you where we're at as programs comparatively.
And then we look at the very recent past and just looking at the last couple of weeks, this Oregon, it's one thing to have it announced, okay, we're leaving the Pac-12 and we're going to the Big Ten and all this offseason buildup for that. And then you get that first Big Ten game. Well, that first Big Ten game was at the Rose Bowl against UCLA. Was that really a Big Ten game? Is that what that was? And then, so maybe it sunk in a little bit last Friday night, even though that didn't turn out to be a good game. Oregon was clearly, forget 31-10, folks. If you didn't watch the game, Oregon was substantially the better team all over Michigan State. But to see a Michigan State team that did show up about 10 years ago as part of a home and home with Oregon, but as a Big Ten opponent, did it sink in just a little bit more that this is a member of the Big Ten now, wearing as I believe the play-by-play announcer during the game said, called you highlighters coming with bad intentions.
Yeah. Angry highlighters.
Yes.
I love that. Yeah. No, the Big Ten has been a tough one. I've been pretty vocal about it on my show. I was disappointed in the fact that the West Coast broke up. I mean, when you talk about regional, we are a region. We are very separated from the rest of the country. There's a gigantic mountain range that separates us from the rest of the country. We are our own area on the West Coast, and we had a pretty good run for 100 years. It's just that the rest of the countries, either or the media markets, everything else, wanted their part of the West Coast or whatever the case may be. But yeah, it was frustrating. And I went through the stages of grief. I went through all of them, and I finally got into acceptance at the end. And now I'm into the future, and now I'm into hope and what could be for the future. And it had to happen. I'm glad it happened, especially when I look at our friends, the Beavers and the Cougars out here that are on an absolute no man's land. I'm super excited, but with that also comes some other issues, right? We're in this to win it. We want to be recognized as one of the best teams in whatever conference we're in. I think Oregon brings a certain level of swagger or whatnot to the table. Maybe they don't have as much tradition. Maybe they don't have as many wins historically, but this is a team in Oregon that basically carried this conference, like I said, for about the last decade. USC has been down. Washington had a good run a little bit here and there, but it was ups and downs. Oregon, for the most part, only had that one real blip with the end of the Mark Helfrich era. Other than that, they've been pretty good now, 15 going on 20 years almost. This is a real challenge to go into the Big Ten because it's not only is it steeped in tradition, but it's also steeped in very good teams. And getting rid of the divisions and everything else, getting a 12-team playoff, it's just going to make it that much harder to get to that national championship. And going back to that statement I said about walking out of that game and how depressed we were after that game, because that was where we felt like we were that close. We had got through every level we needed to get through. We just had to get through that one last level, and we couldn't do it. As a Duck team and as a Duck community, that football team didn't do it. Great team, just couldn't give it up against another great team. This is going to be a tough one, because you're going to have on your schedule every single year at least 2 or 3 of these games that are basically the equivalent of a playoff game from our perspective in the past. You know, in the Pac-12, we had to get through a couple games every year, and there were really good games and really good matchups that people really didn't respect all that much, but they were close games we had to get through. Games against Cal, games against Stanford, games against ASU or Arizona, they would always show up. It wasn't the USC, it wasn't the marquee matchup, but it was still tough games. We're going to find that here in this conference as well. It might not be this year, but as this parity continues to go in the college football the way we see it, Vanderbilt beating Alabama is all you need to see, man. The best are not as best as they were in the past. The worst aren't as worst as they used to be anymore. Think everybody, a high tide rises all boats, right? So I think everybody's going to get better. The parity of this whole conference, the whole country is going to get better. And I think Oregon is just primed to be in a really good place going into the Big Ten. If they can be anywhere near the conversation of being a Big Ten champion in year one, we are absolutely thrilled, over the moon.
Got Ryan Winter on the line from Sports Chat 503. You can catch him right here on YouTube. And you go live every Tuesday evening,
Tuesday
Ryan?
night, yep, 5:30 Pacific Coast time. Other than that, I just do videos, random videos, top 25 videos, college football, the normal stuff.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, of course, there were some questions about this football team through 2 weeks with the performance against Idaho. Now we're finding out Boise State's a pretty good football team with a pretty good player in the backfield, but it's still to come down to a final kick. But since then, they've been looking good against Oregon State, Michigan State, of course, the last opponent, and UCLA 2 weeks ago. So what has changed?
Well, it's really the offensive line, and it's the protection on the quarterback. And with that comes staying on schedule when it comes to your first down, second down, staying in front of the chains, not getting pushed back based on sacks, not getting hurried, letting the quarterback operate. Quarterback can really throw it, and you got to give them a chance. This team wants to be balanced. They want to run the ball. They want to throw the ball. But the offensive line had a tough time in the first 2 games. And it really wasn't a physicality issue. It was more of a mathematical issue. Usually it's a 5-on-3 in the offensive line. Maybe it's a 5-on-4. So you get a double team. Maybe you get 2 double teams in pretty much every offensive set. And in these cases, they were just bringing 5. They were bringing 4. They were bringing 6. They were just putting an extra pressure on the quarterback. And they were making Oregon one-dimensional because of that. So Idaho came out and had a great blueprint. I mean, they set the tone right out of the gate. They put pressure on Dylan Gabriel. I mean, the sack total in the first 2 games was almost the equivalent of the sack total for the entire year last year or more. So that was alarming. And they finally figured that out. They got things organized a little bit. And since then, they've been on a tear. And you're right. They've always been able to run the ball. But the passing game is really elite because the wide receiver group is possibly the best wide receiver group that we've had at Oregon in years. It's at least on paper, one of the deepest. Last year was also pretty good, but there's just so much depth here. There's so much talent. You got to be able to move the ball around, and you can't be doing that if your quarterback's getting sacked.
I'm not selling Michigan State as a good team, but at the same time, I saw them play a 4th quarter against Boston College. They should have won the game. They were the better team physically. They won a game at Maryland in which they were a 10-point dog. And to see Oregon get after Michigan State in regards to on both sides of the line of scrimmage was pretty remarkable. No running game for Michigan State. They were all over Aiden Childs, just continuous pass rush pressure. And then again, the offensive line, Jordan James, they were ultra impressive as well. Yeah. So Oregon just playing a game, obviously, that's a good comparison point. I don't know that it's the best because when teams are that dominant over the opponent, I don't know if you can make a direct comparison. But of course, Ohio State did play Michigan State the week before, and they had more issues in the first half than Oregon did for sure. For the Ducks, it was more turnovers, keeping it somewhat close for a little while. Where with the Buckeyes, they actually were giving up plays to Michigan State. So just the line play has been strong on both sides of the ball, it appears.
Yeah, it has. And I watched that Michigan State, Ohio State game very closely as well, like you mentioned. I was very impressed. I thought Michigan State, for example, one of their players transferred over to Oregon this year, Derek Harmon, DJ Harmon, whatever you want to go as, but he was a great player for them. He's been a great player for Oregon. I mean, he came onto Oregon's defensive line and has been one of the best players every single week. And I thought, well, there's got to be more guys like them on that line, right? I mean, that's just one guy that came over, right? I was really, really impressed. And we had a guy go over there too, Ben Roberts, number 55. I was very impressed with that offensive defensive line performance, because I did think there was going to be a little more physicality from their side, and they were going to test him a little bit more, especially when it came to putting pressure on the quarterback, because that is the weak spot. If you look at Oregon's film over the first games, that's the spot that you can try to, take advantage of. And I don't know if anybody has done a good job since that point. But they're going to get tested this week. That JTT, we know him very well. One of the biggest recruits, obviously, over the last couple of years. Oregon really wanted him. I have so much respect for those other guys on that line. I love that Jack Sawyer, all those other guys. They epitomize a good defense, especially when they work together. They're going to put a lot of pressure on this Oregon team. And these guys are going to have to bring in extra offensive linemen on the edge, run a heavy package if they need to get short yardage. They're going to need to use their tight ends to stay in, to protect. They're going to need to have an extra back, or maybe have the back stick around and chip a little bit longer. But I would say the recipe for success, if you're a defense, is to try to stack that line and try to bring those backers off the outside. Because that's the thing is that they can get kind of a little stuck, that offensive line. They get all their assignment first, and then they'll start blocking, and then all of a sudden, here come a guy around the edge they're unaccounted for. And I feel like those guys can do a lot of damage. Those guys also are awesome at Ohio State. So it tends to be that's going to be probably the matchup to look for. Can Ohio State put pressure on the quarterback of Oregon? And if Dylan Gabriel can get the ball out of his hands quickly, it might not matter. But we've seen this year, there's been an issue a little bit with him maybe not reading the pass rush as well. He's a pretty lackadaisical in the pocket. It feels like sometimes he kind of just chill back there a little bit. And this could be a game where he needs to turn that clock up a little bit.
Yeah, you bring that up. And what kept that game close, of course, the one interception by Michigan State, Malik Spencer, was a ridiculous pick in the end zone, but it was still a pretty poor decision by Dylan Gabriel. But it was actually the second pick, to me, that was the bad decision and the bad throw, considering he should know as well as anybody what kind of angle you need throwing that out to the corner, to the pylon there, and threw it late, all those things. And two interceptions out of Dylan Gabriel. Obviously, that would not be something that would be a recipe for success this Saturday.
No. And, the older you get as a quarterback, I've always said this, the more you want to stay in the pocket, right? When you're young, you're willing to run out and get out of there and try to make something happen. All you need is a couple injuries to know you're better off in the pocket. Stick around with the big offensive linemen, let those guys protect you. And there's often times where sometimes that quarterback clock slows down a little bit. And, those guys feel like they have a little bit of extra time. And then all of a sudden, pop, there goes the ball. And we see it every week. We see guys come in, put extra pressure on the offensive tackles or the tight end, or maybe when the tight end is positioned on the next to the offensive tackle and then in motion moves over to the other side. Now the defense has a freaking full wide open shot at it that no one's accounting for. So there's just some mathematics that needs to take place, especially against a team like Ohio State. The Ohio State defense, I feel like, is, if not the best, it's one of the best in the country right now. And they're out there to prove something this year. Big picture, I kind of think about, you talked about that in 2012 or 2010 game. That 2010 Ohio State team was on a mission. They had lost the previous couple BCS games in a row, maybe. I think it was maybe 2, maybe even 3 in a row. And Oregon walked in there like happy-go-lucky, like, yay, we're in the Rose Bowl. This is going to be awesome. And they were on a mission. That Ohio State team came in there, all business. Terrell Pryor and team did a great job of winning that game. They needed to win that game. They needed to get the monkey off their back a little bit. And Oregon just happened to be the sacrificial lamb. This year kind of feels the same way. Coming off of a couple years of disappointment against Michigan, not being where they want to be at the end of the year, this being the first year of the 12-team playoff, this being the first year of the expanded Big Ten. I think Ohio State's on a mission this year. And this for this game for Ohio State on the road, it sets up for them pretty well. They're going to go into a very, very strong atmosphere and have no problem at all. Because, again, this is a small stadium. They're focused. They know what they're not going to hear the crowd noise. They're focused on them. So this is just a really good team. It's the biggest matchup in Autzen Stadium history. I can't wait for it. But it's going to be something I don't think we can overhype it. I think it's literally going to live up to all the hype. And I think it's going to be a good game.
Yeah, what was impressive last week out of the Buckeyes is that the offensive line really handled business up front against Iowa. Both running backs were just a tick under 7 yards per carry against a defense that just doesn't give up that kind of yardage typically in the ground. And they were lights out on both sides of the ball once they got cleaned up some of the issues. And what's phenomenal and what's very unique to college football at this stage in the season is a lot of the things that you're pointing out is every time you look at a matchup, it's like, well, they haven't seen this caliber yet. We don't run into these type of matchups, especially at this stage of the season where, yes, this is a huge jump for everybody involved on both sides of this matchup in regards to facing for the first time this level of play, this intensity, this talent level.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's why everybody circled this game because, in the modern era, you're probably not going to get the really big matchups in the first weeks like you used to get in the BCS era and the other sort of stuff because teams don't need to. And so now you got these super conferences. Now it's all about the conference games. Now it's going to take to get to week 6 or week 7 before we have real solid matchups. And this is going to be huge. I tend to think that the reason why Oregon could be successful in this game is because they're very versatile. They don't lean on one thing. It's hard to get them to be one-dimensional. I think Ohio State's defense is good. They can fly around. They can protect on every level. The back end of their defense is great. The front end of their defense is great. Their linebackers are great. I don't see a weak point. But Oregon is good enough offense to where they're going to nickel and dime you a little bit. They're going to make you maybe go one way or go the other. They're going to try to force the terms a little bit. And if Oregon can just stay on schedule and not turn the ball over, I think they're going to be right in this thing late. The big thing is nationally is with the 12-team playoff, Oregon needs to just have a very good game. I think if Oregon goes out there and gets completely blown out by Ohio State, we got a long hill to climb again. Oh man, that's only one loss, but it's to a good team, but you have to show up in this game. I don't think that if you lose this game and you play a good game and only lose by a touchdown or a field goal, I think you're going to still get a lot of respect from the nation on this one because Ohio State is that team this year that really looks like to be the best team in the country outside of maybe a couple other teams that are in that conversation. But I would put the Buckeyes as the number 1 team in the country right now. No problem about it. They just haven't had those games. I mean, who have they had to play yet? They go out and beat Oregon at Oregon. That's a big game. And I think that's bigger than any other game anybody else has played this year.
Yeah, I would certainly back that up. And, it's way too early to dive into scenarios being the second week of October. But with an 18-team Big Ten, we have spaced out these teams so much, and there are 9 conference games. Therefore, you're missing 8 possible opponents. Therefore, when you look at Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, you could even put Iowa in that bunch and some others. They almost play in their own silos. And this is one of the few crossover games between what is supposed to be the very best of the conference. So we could have some kind of crazy logjam of one-loss teams at the end of this season, depending on if, let's say, Oregon wins this game against Ohio State, but then Ohio State cleans the deck the rest of the season, and Oregon, let's say, trips up against somebody else. And then you've got these other teams that don't have to deal with Ohio State or Oregon. And I've run enough scenarios. And again, I think between all of the conferences are getting to this point with 16 or 18 teams where the scenarios just play out to where we're going to have at least one conference, if not multiple conferences, that have a jam up at first place or a tie for second place among several teams where there is no head-to-head to go with, and it's going to come down to a tiebreaker.
Yeah. And this could be the year. I think you're going to see a lot more of that as well. And I actually am of the thought that that's not necessarily a bad thing because, again, it's just more conversation. It brings together more heads to try to figure these things out. The whole idea of you obviously did your voice of college football, but the whole breakdown of all the for the Big Ten, all the tiebreakers, it's like pages worth of information. I mean, it is like a document. I need to have a lawyer describe to me. I mean, it's wild. But you're right. The possible scenarios, everybody has to just let it play out. And college football usually does a pretty good job of everything ironing out at the end anyway. But I tend to think that Oregon was not overrated going into this year. I don't know about at as high as 3, especially with like teams like Texas and whatnot behind them, the way it first worked out. But way it sits right now, everybody's seen everybody play for the most part. The Bama loss was a big one. It opened up the door for a lot of other people. The Tennessee loss behind everything else. There's all sorts of stuff working on there. I think Oregon and Ohio State representing the Big Ten right now is actually a great thing for the Big Ten, because you've had Michigan last couple of years. They win a national championship this year or last year. There was no, they weren't going to win anything this year for the most part. They had to rebuild their whole team. They're going to take a step back for sure. Then you add these other 4 schools in. The fact that you could add one of these schools to be a premier team and be in this conversation, this is a huge win. I mean, this game might be, I've heard people say it could be the biggest game ever on NBC. It could be the biggest game in the Big Ten over the last years. That's not an Ohio State-Michigan game or not a historic rivalry. The fact that this is all happening right now, this is all a win-win for everybody involved. So I'm thrilled with it. I think it's the good part of conference realignment. Maybe the bad part of conference realignment is our soccer team going to Rutgers on a Tuesday night. But the good part is these are the matchups we're looking for, and we want more matchups like this. Like you said, I think it's a positive thing for college football, and it's a positive thing for all of sports.
Ryan Winter, Sports Chat 503, Tuesdays at 5:30 Pacific time. You can catch him live, and then, of course, with all sorts of videos throughout the week. Ryan, it should be a heck of a scene and hopefully a heck of a game. I believe it will deliver, and it may be just round 1 of 2, or who knows, 3 in this new age of college football. So, Ryan, we appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much. If there's any Buckeye fans that are going to Autzen, I'll be in section 34 all the way at the bottom. Come see me. Have a beer. And Mark, thank you so much, like I said before, for not only for us, but for the college football community. You do a great service for everybody. The voice of college football. Thank you so much.